is the author of 2 full-length poetry collections, Or the Ambiguities and To Light Out, plus a number of poetry chapbooks such as Dear Pierre, Placefulness, and Pitching Woo. She was awarded a Robert Rauschenberg Foundation residency and a New York Foundation of the Arts Fellowship in Poetry. She's currently working on, among other things, a libretto for an opera, which is called You Who Made the Heavens Incline. And this is about one of the first great composers, Cassia, a 9th century Byzantine nun. She's also writing a book of poems inspired by the 18th century astronomers William and Caroline Herschel. Let's welcome Karen Weiser.
So I'll be reading from my first book of poetry, To Light Out. You can actually find it online if you want to download it for free at my website, which is www.karenweiser.net. And it was put online. My publisher, Ugly Duckling Press, does this wonderful thing where they, after the book is out of print, they make it available for free. So I'll read the introduction. It begins with a Swedenborg quotation. When angels speak with man, they turn themselves to him and conjoin themselves with him. Turning toward one another, 18th century philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg and his angels talked, and in these exchanges found that words themselves turn. The more spiritual the writing, the more the words turn. The highest levels of heaven contain words totipotent in their capacity to represent. For Swedenborg, quote, heavenly writing is such that thought cannot exhaust it. Human language descends to us from this perfectly spiritual language by way of what Swedenborg called correspondences. Every word contains natural meanings and inward spiritual meanings, mostly lost to us, like the Puritans' dual registers of language, as both sacred and profane, or Plotinus's relation of the material to the spiritual. By beholding the symbolic quality of language, sensing the correspondences, one finds the angels, quote, all the words and their meanings are correspondences and thus contain a spiritual or inward sense in which are the angels. Perhaps Swedenborg employs the etymological resonance of the word angel with messenger to imply bearing a message across something that lies between states of being. In mid-20th century poetry, Jack Spicer's conception of correspondence is coupled with communication by letters, where letters are both the form of the address and the units that make up words, like what we send through the mail. He doesn't elaborate on this so much as performs it for us in his book After Lorca, writing letters to the already dead Federico Garcia Lorca. In these letters, Spicer fashions poetry in a ghostly act of correspondence, with all poems in communication with one another through a chain of signification so that poems/letters act seemingly like language. He writes, even these letters, they correspond with something, I don't know what, that you have written, perhaps as unapparently as that lemon corresponds to this piece of seaweed. And in turn, some future poet will write something which corresponds to them. His pun is made clear by the line that follows. This is one of my favorite lines of Spicer's. This is how we dead men write to each other. All poems are variants of one another in their relation to the outside, or what Spicer calls the real. His outside is the thing one must tune into in order to receive the poems, and thus one of Spicer's metaphors for a poet is a radio. The poet is a radio. The poet is a liar. The poet is a counter-punching radio. Spicer, like Swedenborg, is interested in the messages emanating from what usually lies beyond perception. By the way, there's no evidence that Spicer read Swedenborg. I've looked into it. But their lines of thought converge, clearly. In 1964, using a massive antenna to detect radio waves, scientists Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson discovered that the static, or cosmic microwave background radiation, continuously emerging through the receiver was from no human-made radio source. With the assistance of astrophysicists, they determined that the mysterious sound springs from the Big Bang, its radiation continuing to move through space as it expands. The poet, as radio, must also be hearing not only Martians, as Spicer humorously called the external force pushing through from the outside, but the origin of the universe. In 1734, Swedenborg was the first person to propose the nebular hypothesis, conjecturing that the sun and planets formed out of rapidly rotating nebular matter. The nebular hypothesis is still the basis of current conceptions about the formation of the solar system. In his book, Earths in the Universe, 1860 translation of De Telluribus, 1758, Swedenborg writes of his journeys traveling with angels to visit the moon and other planets, where he talked with the aliens. His interplanetary experiences in De Telluribus expressly foresee the discovery of Uranus, the seventh planet in the solar system, in 1781, actually discovered by William Herschel, who I'm now writing about, which is funny. These things keep coming together. In his mind, he saw it. He claimed heavenly visitors gave him the information. This travel was a motion through the inward space of his consciousness, which Swedenborg simultaneously perceived as outer space. He moved through both inner and outer distances by altering his mental state. When I became pregnant, my brain and body were suddenly filled with static. This static was less a sound than a sense that the flickering of snow on a TV screen had been made into liquid and pumped into my veins. It was difficult to think, hard to do anything at all. After a while, I realized that it was her signal. I couldn't hear my own ways of thinking or feeling with this other person's atoms multiplying inside of me. It was the sound of the Big Bang, and my own radio brain was tuned in. I decided in Swedenborgian manner, to turn toward that static, that originary signature. The following poems diagram this act. And then there are 3 sections in the book, and each one has a title page in which I've juxtaposed a quote from Swedenborg and a quote from Jack Spicer, and then there's a line through the middle of the page, and then at the bottom is a dream that I had. I was keeping track while I was pregnant. So I'm putting all 3 of us literally in conversation here. And so I have substituted the initials ES for Swedenborg and JS for Jack Spicer. And then I'll just draw the line with my hand so you can kind of visually see it. ES, I have repeatedly talked with angels about this matter. JS, now if you have a cleft palate and are trying to speak with the tongues of men and angels, you are still going to speak with a cleft palate. The doctor shines a light into my mouth and says, her eyes peer back at me, she is standing. Her consciousness is located in my head, her body filling up the entire space of my form. In the presence of another. The dispatches possibly picked up a static I couldn't register, multiplying in hypotheticals like cells, when, lo, the tall belfries discontinued for the 100th time, and in mid-sound snow I picked up the crackling of another. These originary moments, already a museum of burnt machines, when slowed down to speech or consideration, are our kind and tender unreasons. The way habits perform a pathway through infinite possibility, though we grieve to think we still murmur, and in murmuring are completing a habit. You hear the dead are unregenerate, tuning out or in at the edges of your ears. I grieve to think this murmur's fringe of vague moves static to center. Cross it, and you yourself are leavened, hawking the sound of space, still pushing out the Big Bang. And I just have to say that this poem and the next poem are clearly William James poems, thinking about the fringe of vague and habits. So, but I daren't see in the clumsiness of my thoughts, upholstered with ideas continually there, heartbeat vistas with a bundle of damp, personal papers, hands, errors, light, wet with inheritance, dress, mutations, habit. While you wait to return your lace, your furniture is copied, and by furniture I mean DNA, spiraling into its own pulse, drinking the ancient transparent dream, emanating from the mattresses that are our bodies. Put a finger on that run of notes. This is life, and its laws are merely habits, betting gravity with panorama in mind. Can you see those things you taught yourself to ignore, the colossus of them, with a historian's pity? And the corresponding failures of office inside our herd of selves, a golden network of selves, under the thatched roof shade of our present shepherd, sink into the gravity of indistinct sound. Section 2. ES. For it was then known what correspondence is and what representation is, and that all things on the earth correspond to spiritual things in heaven and in the church, or what is the same represent them, and therefore the natural things that constituted the externals of their worship serve them as mediums for thinking spiritually, that is, thinking with the angels. JS. But the answer is this: every place and every time has a real object to correspond with your real object. That lemon may become this lemon, or it may become this piece of seaweed, or this particular gray in this ocean. One does not need to imagine that lemon. One needs to discover it. I lay down in birth in a bog, green hills sloping, sounds of frogs. Thoreau. Are not the wood frogs the philosophers who frequent these groves? Methinks I imbibe a cool, composed, frog-like philosophy when I behold them. I have heard now, within a few days, the peculiar dreaming sound of the frogs, which belongs to the summer, their midsummer night's dream. And, of course, now that I've been writing about Edgar Allan Poe, all I hear is a derisive comment calling the Transcendentalists the Frog-Pondians. Having dragged my shelf of sleep like one drags a river for possibilities. If you say that there is an oak door studded with sunlight between us, it is the sunlight itself that must be opened, rolling in the corridors, holding that moment, a storm cloud in your hands. Having linked our hands, the distance is a saddle placed over the slippery skin of night. And I say, crumpling has made the distance into versions of itself, whose miles begin to resemble pale maps, old photographs with studied shadow inside each female self, composed like a 19th century diorama, all heft and movement of hands. This poem is a reenactment. Between reason and the thing you crush by entering is a silent meteor idiom. I mean, the extremities whistle with it, in passageways for the banditti caught in your mental loom. A sure sum will come along if you can hear the tune our teeth make when we turn away from each other. Pliny looks through the hole in the floor where the shape of your voice usually resides. Identity and enigma to be revealed in the future, founded on facts with a title impossible to pronounce, or at least the historical female version. I mean, it is summer, and there is body hair to account for, its intricate system of rain and actual rain, a purple meteor cameo against the pink sky. Don't swindle me out of intellect with your face's false bloom. Don't dissemble like a tourist with the solicitude of birds. There is an ethereal pulse between your ideas about the poem and its actual being, no matter how you think they coincide. So what if we make it another kind of physical logic instead of Vedic underfauna? So what if we call it mystery and invade? But a name for excess greets us. And I have to say, this poem I always think of as my Whitmanic poem. It's a lot of 19th century American literary references in this book. But a name for excess greets us in the winnowing out of thought. There's too much around us, dear cricket. We are merry singed to a lamp, caught in the crouching feet of a fire. An idea is being held to contemplate it. Slam the book, put down the violin, and warm your exhausted proboscis in the trestle bed of an emotional fire. Every point of exchange provides a half-obliterated inscription we can't read, self-contained and rain-washed. Each passing moment offers us only a method of punctuating a past with its counting house elbows and velvet charm. After all, there is no period in the mind. Whoe'er you be beside a trestle bed, you're never free from the trestle bed. While you lie within it, beside it, pulling a cord from your mind to the problem of asylum from matter. I only want a lover to make every day blank in the speaking of our gas-colored laburnums, making spaces in the mind to let the light, with its verdigris and heat, burn off the places that bury our sound, having only a few scores to make a mantle settle up the poverty of speech. Section 3. J.S. This was supposed also to be the story of the creation of the universe, the pieces of the explosion coming together, breathless, coagulating whatever truth they could muster. ES. But let him know that the spaces and distances, and therefore the progressions, which exist in the natural world in their origin and first cause, are changes of state of the interiors, and that with angels and spirits they appear according to these changes, and that through changes of state they may be apparently translated from one place to another, and from one earth to another, even to earths which are the end of the universe. Inch-long baby climbs out and up, kangaroo style. I eat her. Once inside, she's a million stars. And this is the last poem. It's called, When I Say Virtue, I've Fallen from My Chair. At the end of the table is an ocean to cross, and an ocean is never in shambles. Like a book with 34 decks burns St. Elmo's fire against the white leaf, a door you stand to apprehend. Close your dream and put it away. A sterile miracle of your inner fine ghost is a morgue with an imprint of sea and continents, a mighty history patching up its root system to emerge in the pause of identification at work. Visit the planets, take your mind off your eyes. You see assembled around you what you know. What more do you want to push through this damaged surface, bric-a-brac hanging from every word where the red tape should be? Thank you.